Hi, everybody. My name is Filippo Seracini. I'm one of the program manager in the Azure Stack team. In particular, I focus on the security and compliance of Azure Stack. So how many of you are familiar or ever heard about Azure Stack? Few of them? OK, so first of all, this is the agenda. I'll give you a little bit overview about Azure Stack, and then we'll go into the more details, the part that you probably care the most, which is the security posture and the compliance story for Azure Stack. So what is Azure Stack and what is the value proposition? So Azure Stack is Azure. Think of Azure Stack as Azure. We package it and we bring it into your own data center, your private data center. So you will be able to run exactly the same software that runs in Azure. With the same API, same portal experience, same IaaS and PaaS capabilities that Azure has, Microsoft has in its own public data center with Azure. They will be able to come down into your private data center. So you'll be able to basically decide to run your cloud technology that you run on Azure. You will be able to also run in your private data center in a fully disconnected mode or in a hybrid mode. So you will have to be able to basically enable any kind of application that you like. They can be completely disconnected, for example, for critical workloads that you do not want or you cannot put on the private cloud, but you still want to use cloud-like technology. Think of like PaaS and IaaS with the same Azure-like experience. So you develop once and you deploy many times. Or you can go for a hybrid scenario where you can do some part of your computation on-prem and then some other part of the computation on the public cloud, again, using the IaaS and PaaS capabilities of Azure. And here, basically, you see what you see here is a very high-level overview of the Azure technology. So on the right side, you have public Azure, the one that you're currently using, the one that you go on azure.com, right? So from a developer point of view, on the top level, you have all the developer tools, so the portal, the PowerShell, and the third-party open source tool as well. And then you have the Azure Resource Manager, which is the abstraction layer. They expose basically all the Azure capabilities. And then you have the IaaS and PaaS capabilities, and finally the infrastructure. So the same kind of stack you move when you have the same kind of experience on Azure Stack. So especially on the top layer, you have exactly the same portal, exactly the same capabilities, the PowerShell and third-party tools. You will deploy and use in the same way that you do in Azure Stack, in Azure, sorry. So basically, let's say you are developing with Visual Studio. Visual Studio comes already integrated with Azure Stack as a deployment target. So you develop your code and you say deploy on Azure or deploy on Azure Stack. So you can enable all the CI/CD approaches, so the continuous development, continuous integration. You'll be able to do it directly from your Visual Studio from your local machine. Then the Azure Resource Manager is exactly the same as well of Azure. So you have fully consistent API. So the API that you find on Azure, you will find the same exact identical one in Azure Stack. And then the same Azure IaaS and PaaS capabilities. Obviously, with a caveat, Azure Stack will have a sort of like a subset of the capabilities of Azure because Azure started 6 years earlier than Azure Stack. So we will bring more and more PaaS services and IaaS capabilities to Azure Stack, but you have the same experience. And finally, where they started diverging is in the infrastructure, because Azure has its own Microsoft design, its own hardware. Instead, for Azure Stack, we ship Azure Stack as an integrated solution with regular hardware you buy from your hardware vendors. And so what kind of experience you're going to have? So when you go to Azure, on the left-hand side, you have the Azure customers. It can be you or your customers. And then on the right-hand side, you have the Microsoft engineers from the product group teams that basically operate Azure Stack. Azure. When you go to Azure Stack, obviously, since we could not package the Microsoft engineer and bring it to your own data center, that role will be replaced by you and your team. So you will have the engineers, they operate Azure Stack, the cloud admin that has a high-level experience of Azure Stack with the portal. We design a specific portal to manage Azure Stack. And then it will be your cloud architect basically that will create and design the application. And on the left-hand side, you will have your customers. They will have exactly the same experience, exactly the same capabilities that they have on Azure. So what does Azure Stack look like? So it will come, so the smallest footprint for Azure Stack is going to be 4 servers, plus the switches, the total rack switches, and the BMC switch. And then will come, obviously, it's an integrated solution, integrated system with software, hardware, and it will come with support and services. But the part that I really would like to go and present to you is basically this part. So Azure Stack, as I said, is an integrated system with a hardware and basically predefined hardware. We pre-validate everything. So we pick the hardware for you, we validate it, we configure, we set it up. So the deployment configuration is all predefined, pre-scripted. So when it comes to your data center, Azure Stack is ready to go, is already validated. You don't have to go through the process of figuring out which driver, which firmware are compatible, whether there are bugs or not. It's ready to go for you because we validated in our data center, in our labs, we'll have exactly the same installation and exactly the same deployment as you have in yours. So monitoring diagnostic. So Azure Stack will come with a monitoring diagnostic capability built into the integrated system. So on the Azure Stack admin portal, you will have all the diagnostic data from the infrastructure. And then obviously for your application side of the story, you will have, you could be able to use your whatever tools you're using today to monitor your own data center or when you are on Azure, because also the marketplace will be similar, because since the same API, the marketplace you have on Azure will also be able to have in Azure Stack. Then more for like a operational point of view, you have, for example, if something goes wrong, let's say a hard drive breaks or something else, you don't have to figure out what's the best way to replace it. It's all scripted. It's all the field replacement unit. It's a well-defined process. It's mostly automated from the portal. So you just do that and follow it. You don't have to go and figure out how it works. We try to basically democratize the operational functionality of the cloud and bring it to your data centers. Then patching and updating. So Azure Stack comes with a patching tool integrated inside. So basically, you don't have to figure out or decide which patch to apply and when to apply it. There is an updating engine, an orchestration engine that basically takes the curated payload with the payload that we validate in our labs, which is the same kind of infrastructure you have in your labs. And then basically what we call internal, the PNU tool, patch and update tool, will take care of orchestrating all the uploads, all the updates from the firmware all the way up to the portal. This will happen in a cloud fashion way, which means there's zero downtime. So your workloads running, your tenant workloads running on top of it will not realize what's happening underneath. Because when you're in Azure or you're on any public cloud, you don't realize, I mean, any public cloud is always updating underneath, right? But your workloads are always available. The same kind of experience will be with Azure Stack. Your workload on top will always up and running, while the infrastructure underneath will be updated, again, from the firmware all the way up to the portal. And again, the payloads also, since we have the same exact infrastructure, same exact deployment, because it's an integrated solution, as you guys have in your own data centers, then we will have a way higher bar for validation because we validate on the same kind of setup you have, and therefore you can have a very high confidence that everything will work fine, and you will have just to simply run and execute the update. Business continuity, Azure Stack will come with a BCDR story for basically backup and recovery of Azure Stack in case something happens to your data center. And finally, the part that they probably be care the most, Azure Stack comes with a very strong security story, and I'm about to walk you through that. So basically, when Azure Stack shows into your data center, what you have to do is just plug it into giving network capability to your border switch, giving space, power, and cooling. Identity integration, Azure Stack comes with 2 options, either Azure Active Directory, or if you want to stay on-prem, you can use your enterprise Active Directory and connect it to Azure Stack via ADFS. And then finally, you can plug in any data center monitoring, ticketing, or hardware monitoring tool that you like. So what Azure Stack does look like. This is what the GA, so general availability, which is going to be mid-calendar year this year. Basically, we're going to have 3 hardware partners. It's going to be Dell EMC, HPE, and Lenovo. And these are pictures from the latest show we had at Ignite last year. So these are real picture of Azure Stack, what Azure Stack will look like. This is obviously one of the footprint. The scale of Azure Stack will be based on your demand. The smallest footprint will be 4 servers, as I mentioned earlier. And then we just recently announced that Cisco is also going to be another partner, but they're going to be post GA, so it's going to come sometime later this year. So these are the 4 partners that we have announced so far, and we are working on more. So let's go into the part that we really care about, the infrastructure security, the security posture of Azure Stack. So first of all, I want to talk with you about the customer feedback. So what you told us, what basically our customer told us. This is a survey that we ran inside Microsoft. We have a very large pool of customers with basically we have a community, and later we'll give you the link in case you want to participate to the feedback community. Basically, we use this community to get the feedback to prioritize the investment. So what our customer told us, the majority said that the track record and the security posture of an integrated solution is absolutely important when they have to decide what to buy. They also will favor a solution that comes already pre-hardened, so they don't have to figure out how to do their work. The already solution comes pre-hardened and ready to go. And also they will favor a solution that has pre-validated security settings and features so that it's all like a well-rounded security posture. Also, basically, they indicated that integrating with existing security tools is a very complex and tedious task, and so we look at how to make it easier. It also basically said that security, and probably this is not news for you guys, security is one of the main tasks to overcome in order to go into production. And finally, to no surprise to most of you, probably, compliance, the paperwork associated with compliance is a major headache, and therefore, so they mark it as #1 frustration. So with all of that in mind, basically we'll listen. And I'll show you now how we apply all this feedback into the design of the security posture of Azure Stack. So first of all, a little bit of Azure Stack architecture. As you can see here, Azure Stack is a fully software-defined infrastructure. So you have software-defined network, software-defined storage, software-defined computing, and then this is basically all the lower part. And then you have the Azure Resource Manager, as I mentioned earlier, and then you have the portals and the UX, right? And on the hand side, you have the infrastructure deployment, which is sort of like the orchestration engine inside. The good news is that you don't have to care about this, because Azure Stack is pre-deployed, and all the security and how to secure all these components, the interconnection between them, all the identities, and so forth, those are taken care by us. So when we designed Azure Stack, we really took 2 principles for the security posture. The first one is assume breach. How many of you are familiar with the assume breach? Okay, so assume breach, basically, you start from the assumption is the new approach to security that you have been hearing a lot here at RSA this week. Also last year was a very predominant theme. Basically, assume breach, it says, how can I do? I mean, I start from the assumption that my system will be compromised or is already compromised. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So what can I do for, one, detect the compromise? Because on average, 200 days is the average for customers and enterprise around the world to detect a compromise. And usually that happens because third-party companies like police or the FBI in the United States calls the company, say, hey, there is something going on, and we see some weird network communication coming from your infrastructure. So one, how to improve the detection capability, and 2, what can we do to constrain the blast radius? So if a component gets compromised, that does not mean that all the infrastructure is compromised, but only, so how we can make the infrastructure as resilient as possible to compromise and make the life of the attacker as hard as possible to spread across the infrastructure. So we start from the constrained administration. As you know, I mean, the admin credentials are the most targeted, because once you have those, usually you can do whatever you want in the infrastructure. So first of all, we squeeze down the admin capabilities. So there is really the concept of domain admin is very limited in Azure Stack. All the accounts are extremely constrained. We apply the least privilege to every single account, even to the machine accounts, not only to the human accounts, but also to the machine accounts. So how the accounts, the service account that the machine used to communicate with each other. Also, the admin experience can only happen either through the portal or through the command line interface at the ARM layer, so the Azure Resource Manager layer. That's it. So there is no like guessing work to connect into the infrastructure. The infrastructure is completely sealed, so you cannot physically access the infrastructure. So all the administration that you have to do either happen at the portal layer, so it's basically whitelisted because they expose the capabilities, or it happens at the ARM layer through a command line interface, which is the same kind of capabilities you have at the portal, just at the command line level. Also, Azure Resource Manager, ARM, exposes a very fine-grained RBAC capability, which is the same you have in Azure. So you can be extremely specific when you create, for example, new admin accounts for your team. You can really tailor down and the capabilities that you assign to each role in each account. So that for the constrained administration. So we protected the admin and we reduced the blast radius in case of an admin gets compromised. Because basically, even if an admin account is compromised, the admin will only be able to execute the command that the account is designed for and it cannot do everything else. Lockdown infrastructure. So as I said, Azure Stack is going to be sealed. So the whole infrastructure is going to be sealed, not reachable from the outside. So also, since we know all the hardware, we know how it's deployed, we know the software runs on top of it, we know how it's configured, we really raise the bar in terms of security settings and by default. And a lot of the stuff that my colleague Dean just mentioned earlier, we brought down to Azure Stack. So first of all, application whitelisting with device guard, we are enabling by default. So only code that is a Microsoft signed or signed by our OEM partners will be able to execute. Anything else will be blocked. And if somebody tries to execute anything else that is not signed by Microsoft or by our OEM partners, that will be blocked and flagged as malware, so the admin will be immediately notified that something is happening. Also, the least privilege, basically, between inter-component communication. You saw all those blocks, so there is a lot of communication going on in the infrastructure, right? So we basically whitelisted that communication. Every component can only talk with the component that component is designed to, and can only basically execute the list of commands that the component is designed to. So if one component is compromised, it doesn't mean that it can connect to all the infrastructure. And it can only talk with the whitelisted component, and it can only execute a certain set of actions that component, the compromised one, is designed to do, nothing else. So again, the blast radius is extremely reduced. Network echoes, I already mentioned, those are applied across the board to all the infrastructure. So all those components you saw in the architecture, all of them already have echoes inside and outside. Inside mean for inter-component communication, and also from the outside, only whatever is needed is exposed, everything else is blocked by default. And again, seal host, I mean, the Hyper-V host and all the VMs are not reachable and not accessible because the infrastructure, as in a cloud, you don't manage every single component because the cloud, it brings the automation, orchestration. That's how you get the benefit and the scale, right? I mean, Microsoft has a huge data centers, so therefore, the only way basically to optimize and make it sustainable is to have automation and orchestration in place. Therefore, you don't need to access all the components because those are basically self-managed. Also, from a compliance point of view, simplify auditing, because auditing is a huge part of the detection and is also a huge part of the compliance story. So basically, we enable all the audit logs and we enable all the security logs in Azure Stack. We collect them by default and we centrally store in a storage account from where you could be able to point through a REST interface with your security tool like a SIEM tool. So you'll be able to basically extract all the infrastructure logs, all the audit logs from a centralized location, and you don't have to go inside the infrastructure because everything is already pre-configured and pre-collected for you. And so now I want to also talk about the second principle, hardened by default. As I said, the first one was assume breach, the second one is hardened by default. In other words, another way to look at this is everything we could possibly do to turn on security to harden infrastructure, we did it already. So you don't have to figure out, you don't have to validate it. It already comes with everything in place. So data rest encryption is a huge ask from our customer. Most of the compliance standards, think of PCI, think of FedRAMP, think of HIPAA, require data rest encryption. So we simply enable by default for you so you don't have to go through the pain and the downtime associated with it. So when Azure Stack comes to your data center, the data rest is encrypted by default using BitLocker. Network encryption, all the communication between those components, you saw all the components in the infrastructure, it's all encrypted. We only use encrypted protocols. There is no clear text communication. So even if you want to wiretap inside the infrastructure, it's going to be much harder because everything is encrypted. All the components of the infrastructure use strong authentication via certificate bearers and so on. so that basically there is a very strong authentication, and unless they are strongly authenticated, there is no communication possible because it's blocked. The security OS baseline, this is a huge part of, very common requirement in the compliance standards, and also very common ask and very common practice, where we strongly recommend to our customer to do when they, for example, they deploy a Windows server or any other application. We took the burden and we already applied for you. We basically took the Microsoft recommended baseline and we apply on default on everything. So the Hyper-V host as well as the virtual machine running on top of it. We leverage also the hardware security features like secure boot, Wi-Fi, and so on. And basically, we enable all the security from Windows Server 16 that the previous presentation just talked about, like credential protection, so that all the pass-the-hash kind of attack are mitigated because with credential protection enabled by default, as well as code integrity, so application whitelisting, the one I described earlier with device card. Again, only code that is signed either by Microsoft or by the IAM partner will be able to execute. So again, if an attacker compromise a component, it can now install and run a Mimikatz tool, for example, because that's not signed by Microsoft or by the OEM. Therefore, it will be blocked and flagged to the operator right away. And finally, Windows Server 16 comes with anti-malware enabled by default. With Windows Defender, it's also already enabled and validated on the infrastructure. So all of this comes already by default, comes into your design. So when you get Azure Stack, the integrated solution, all of this is already ready for you, ready to go. On top of that, basically, we also use all the best security best practice from the industry and from Microsoft. As you probably are familiar with the Microsoft software security development lifecycle. Obviously, we follow it. That's a hard requirement for any software product inside Microsoft. And we did it also, obviously, for Azure Stack. We did threat modeling of every component. The threat model will be available for, obviously, under a strict NDA, but those will be available, as well as third-party penetration testing. We hire a third-party vendor to basically pen test everything inside Azure Stack, because we don't want to, basically, you guys don't have to do this. Our customers should be able to get Azure Stack and go in production as fast as possible. So all the burden and all the cost to do the pen testing and every single component, every single interaction between the component will be tested by when Azure Stack GA. Finally, automating patching and update. Obviously, keeping your system up to date, keeping your system patched is a huge step towards having a secure system. And as I mentioned earlier, we have an automated framework that basically applies the patches in an automated fashion, so you don't have downtime, you don't have to schedule the maintenance window where you have to take down your workloads. Your workloads will be able to keep running, and they're running when you are on Azure. You never take down your workloads. The same will be Azure Stack, because the infrastructure will be updated automatically underneath. So we're also working with a lot of the partners you see here today at RSA to have a very strong, a very easy, straightforward security story for partner integration. So as you remember from the customer feedback, one of the feedback was integrating with existing security software was very painful story. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to have a very clear integration story with our partners. This is very, we can do all of this stuff because since it's an integrated solution, we control how the hardware, we control the software, we control how it's installed, we control what is exposed and what not. So we can have a very easy, a clear discussion with our partners to how we integrate. And again, there is the integration at the tenant space where you run the workloads, and therefore you will have all the security tools for the Azure Marketplace that you have on public Azure. And there is going to be an integration story for the infrastructure that runs underneath, and that's the one where we are working on. So compliance. Azure Stack, too fast. Azure Stack, one of the feedback we got from our customer was also that for those customers, they want to go to the public cloud, but they cannot go, or they can only partially go, and depending on what region, maybe there are some legislation, some areas, or for a reason that they want to protect their IPs, they want to keep it in a house. That's where Azure Stack comes into play. So compliance is a big story for Azure Stack. And for that reason, basically, what we did is we engaged with a third-party assessor to basically do a formal assessment of Azure Stack. And here I really want to stress the term assessment, so we cannot do the certification, because as you may be familiar with, any compliance standard basically has three major buckets. It has the technology set of criteria, it has the people set of criteria, and it has the process set of criteria. So we do not own and we do not operate Azure Stack because you and your customer will do that. So we cannot basically certify Azure Stack because we cannot specify how will the people process, the people and the process criteria. Those will be on our customer responsibility, so on your responsibility. What we can do, though, is basically provide a formal assessment to understand how Azure Stack meets the technology criteria related to the infrastructure, and we are going to provide documentation on how those are met. So, for example, we are looking at, and again, we are prioritizing based on the customer feedback, so based on what you told us to prioritize, we are prioritizing standard like credit card payments, we are prioritizing government compliance standards, we are prioritizing healthcare industry. Obviously, another one that we are really putting a lot of effort is CSA, Cloud Security Alliance, Cloud Control Metrics. And find also the famous information security management standard like the ISO that you all know. So all of these basically, we are going to do a formal assessment with a third-party vendor. It will come in, assess Azure Stack as is, the same Azure Stack. It will come to your data center and provide all the documentation on how Azure Stack basically meets the technology-related criteria applicable to the infrastructure. Therefore, basically, you then will have all the documentation to jumpstart your compliance process. Again, our customer told us the compliance documentation was one of the main headache for them, so that's why we are trying to help them by providing all the documentation. Most of the companies already have, companies that have compliance standard, they already have people and process criteria, so they already have that documentation. So the real gap you will have from when you get to Azure Stack to be certified is the tenant application related to the technology, because that depends on what kind of application you're going to deploy in Azure Stack, how you're going to configure. But probably that's the part that you're best familiar with, so you have under full control, so that will be the easiest part for you to fill up. So basically with that, I mean, since we covered this part, we really jumpstart your certification story and the documentation that you need in order to be certified. And again, I want to be specific. We cannot certify Azure Stack because of this reason. We cannot cover all the areas, but we are providing all the documentation from a third-party assessor on how Azure Stack meets the major compliance standards. And we will keep basically expanding the portfolio standards based on customer feedback and what you guys told us to prioritize. So in summary, basically, Azure Stack is delivered as a pre-validated integrated system that basically comes with hardware, software, services, and so on. And basically, we design and specify all the hardware, the software, how it's deployed, how it's configured, how it's operated. And that basically allowed us to really bring up the bar for security and the security posture and the compliance story, because we were able to basically apply the principles assume breach and harden by default. So everything that we could possibly harden in Azure Stack, we harden, and it's going to be ready for you when Azure Stack shows in your data centers. And as well as all the best practices from the industry and from Microsoft are already inside Azure Stack, baked into the architecture. One thing that I really want to stress out here is often when you have to deploy, the pattern that people usually follow is they deploy the architecture, and then the security teams comes in and try to apply the hat of the security, bring all the possible security tools. It's common practice, but unfortunately it has some drawbacks because of overhead and processes and so on. Instead, Azure Stack, since we own the whole design, we basically bake the security into the architecture. Again, all the component communication, all the accounts, all the least privilege between the accounts and the components, so on, all the network records, you name it, that basically is all baked into the infrastructure. Think also the whitelisting, device guard, credential guard, and so on. They're all baked into the infrastructure. Therefore, it's not like an overhead because the system is designed to work that way. So that's really a huge drift, a huge change in the game compared to what you could do in your data center, where you first have to design all of the application and then you have to apply the tools on top of it. And finally, since compliance was such a headache for our customers, we try to do our best to help your compliance story and to bring all the documentation for you so that your compliance process, your certification application is jump-started and you can get into production as fast as possible. Because that's really what we care about. We want you to be successful with Azure Stack, and therefore, get into production and with all your workload up and running and certified is absolutely essential. Therefore, all the security work has been done, and the compliance we have done as much as possible, and there is more standards you would like to for us to go after, please let us know. And the best way for you to let us know is to join this This is an open invitation. Basically, we have the Azure Stack feedback community. If you want to talk with us and have a one-on-one relationship with the product group, that's a way to do it. It's just a feedback. It's a feedback initiative that is not a sales. You don't have to have any kind of experience with the Azure Stack or any Microsoft product. We really want to understand your priorities, the way you will operate your infrastructure, what is important for you, what kind of application you're running, and so on. Sometimes we show, for example, mockups and so on, so that you can give us the feedback so that we can create the product that you really want and you can be successful with. So this is an open invitation. If you want to participate, sign up and give us your feedback. And as you can see, we really take the feedback seriously. We basically base the entire security posture of Azure Stack based on your feedback, so please come and join us. And this is not related only to security. So we are looking for any kind of technical roles for cloud admin, to DevOps, to cloud architect, obviously security expert, and so on. So if you or your colleagues are interested in participating, just join and give us your feedback. And finally, otherwise, they will school me here. This is the final slide. So if you want to, please take a survey to participate and get a LED clock. And here's the URL or the QR code to sign up. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer.